Okay, today we are going to spend a little time with an old friend. We first interviewed him on podcast number 23. So you'd have to go back in the Wayback Machine a little bit to catch that interview. But his name's Mark Mosher. He's, in addition to being a friend of mine and also being a collaborator on the No Poem musical adventures, he is a very active synth guy. He does a lot of tutorials. He does a really popular blog. He does a pretty popular podcast where he does soundscapes and compositions. But what we're going to talk to him about today is something very specific, and that is his role as the creator and maintainer of the Rocky Mountain Synthesizer Meetup. So that's the map of today. Let's start off by saying hi to Mark. Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Hey, Darwin. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for being willing to spend a little time today.
Yeah. Happy to talk and also talk about the meetup because it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, it has been. One of the things that's interesting is that practically any time I speak to somebody in the Denver area, they talk about how they've been influenced by your meetup. You know, they've either met people or they've used it as a launch pad to start doing more performance or to get involved in a group. You know, it came up when we talked to Dean. That's how he got to know a bunch of people that end up being part of his Flux crew, that's it. Flux Mob actually would be a great name for it, maybe. But anyway, so, it keeps on coming up with people in that area. And I wanted to talk to you about it because, with my recent move to Minnesota, I've gotten a chance to drop in on a number of different meetups. And quite frankly, I got used to your Rocky Mountain Synth Meetup and how well it was coordinated and how it was organized, and it seemed like I wasn't getting that from some of the meetups that I attended here. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the history was for your Synth Meetup, but also, get some tips and techniques and ideas for how you make a successful meetup. So
sure,
that's sort of the plan. Why don't we start off by having you give us the history of the meetup?
Okay, well, it was founded in June of 2012, if you can believe it. And I had, before the meetup, I had been involved with other user groups and meetups. So I had been in the Ableton user group, which was started in 2009 and went to maybe about 2011. I had been in some other massive meetups in Boulder. Boulder's a real startup town, so there's a meetup called Boulder Denver New Tech, and so I had some experience to meetups and maybe how to organize things, and but sort of the genesis of it really was I'd moved to Boulder in 2004 and had been here a number of years, and I was just shocked. I'd bump into someone just somewhere, and they would tell me, "Do you know so and so? They live 10 minutes from your house, and they're into synthesizers." And I'm like, "No, I don't know them. How do I not know these people?" And I was kind of trying to network through coffee meetings, and it was really difficult to find people. And funny story, I was out playing at the Asheville Electro Music, and that's where I met Mike Metley for the first time face to face.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, he lives like 10 minutes from you.
Yeah, he's like 15 minutes from my house, and here I am at this at this event, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I live just down the road from you," and I'm like, "All right, I've got to do something about this." So anyway, I started thinking about trying to do, one of the things I liked about the Ableton user group was the just the people, and sort of, but one of the downsides of doing a meetup that's focused on one technology set is it's just that's a good thing. If you're just in that group. So I felt I wanted to create more of a community that was about connection in general, about synthesizers and music art and using computers and hardware. And I felt like being just tunneled into one product was just too tight. I thought it would be, because mainly what I wanted to do was find people, connect people, have people inspire each other, so it would sort of lift up the community in a way. And I just felt I wanted to do more broader ideas. So that was like the first step. And as I was thinking about that, I actually saw Synthtopia, I think, posted a video of Laurie Anderson doing a commencement speech at the New York School of Visual Arts in 2012. So in this video, she mentions Tom Hodgkinson, the guy who wrote the book Being Idle. And I thought her speech was quite inspiring. And part of that book was like, what's work, what's play? So I went out and I bought his book called The Freedom Manifesto. And this book had a chapter in it called Stop Competing. And at the end of every chapter of this book, there's a call to action. And at the end of this chapter, Stop Competing, there was a call to action that was start a guild. Mm-hmm. And it was this whole idea of starting something where the point of it wasn't competition, but cooperation, and how could you lift yourself up. And so then I started thinking about, well, it'd probably be better to start something where we talked over a beer or food or something. So that book really kind of informed the decision to make it a really like more of a drinking club with a synthesizer problem, or an eating club with a synthesizer problem, because I felt that would be social, right? That if you're having a drink or it isn't about the alcohol, but just being together and consuming food and sharing that experience is a real icebreaker. And it'd be really different from all the other meetups I'd been to. That was sort of the genesis of that book, seeing Laurie Anderson's commencement speech tied in with this sort of need to maybe create a networking community that was a little different. So that was the genesis of it. So I thought, okay, this is great. I live in Louisville, Colorado, just outside of Boulder. I'm going to call this thing, because I want it to be broad, the Boulder Synthesizer Meetup at the time. And I said, I need a place that has beer and food and that would allow people to come in and make noise with synthesizers. In my town, there was this little restaurant called the Old Louisville Inn, and they had a room in the back. And this is going to be one of those key features of what makes a meetup successful. A synthesizer meetup is having an isolated room from the rest of the venue. And they basically said, bring some people down, thirsty and hungry, and you can use the room for free. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start this meetup. I'm going to give it a broad name, the Boulder Synthesizer Meetup. And I kind of expected maybe 6 people to show up, right? Just because of my connections with other meetups and just being in the community some. I think we probably had 14, 15 people there that night. You were there that night. Is that what you remember? About 14 or 15
something
people?
Like that. Right. Exactly.
It was really great. And I think people all sort of got the idea of this more general meetup where we rotate themes. So that night we had these 14, 15 people show up, and we had set up some synths, and I think I did something. So then that was the first meetup, and that was in, I think, June 11th, 2012. So started with 14 people. And then I put the meetup on Meetup. The meetup was on meetup.com. Mm-hmm. And that's another crucial point in the success of this, was using meetup.com and not just Facebook for this or something. So from there, it started, people thought that was pretty great, and they started connecting and talking, and we said, let's do another one. So I think the other thing that made this successful was we decided to do it consistently, same day of the second Tuesday of every month, same place, Old Louisville Inn, and we put up the meetup.com page, and people started finding us, and word of mouth just from those 14, 15 people started going out, and then we continued on from there. So that was the very first meetup and sort of the genesis of the meetup, and sort of having it be very social.
Right. So a couple of questions about that. First of all, well, one of the things that I remember, first of all, is an incredible widespread of people. Now, you said that you kind of got it kicked off by, people you knew, but as I recall, it was either the first or the second meeting was people like Chris Blarski showed up, right?
Yep.
And in fact, I infected him with the modular thing, because I think this was it the second one where you had me bring my modular in and make a bunch of squeaky noises.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And, it totally infected him. But then shortly thereafter, you did one where Victoria Lundy brought a theremin in, and all of a sudden people were hyped on theremins. I mean, it really opened up some doors for people. But it's hard for me to imagine that you, knew all these people, because they were, from crazy edges of the world. I mean, Chris Blarski had started off really just doing, Nintendo-based music stuff.
Right. So I didn't know Chris at that. It's a really good point you mentioned it, because there were people at that very first meetup who I didn't know and who saw it was the meetup page. But I think another catalyst for this was the fact that I had been blogging for it at that time 6 or 7 years on Modulate This. I had a companion Facebook page for that. So I had some friends of friends and people I had never met who maybe I were acquaintances of on Facebook. So I started using social media, Twitter and Facebook as well to sort of say, hey, we have a meetup going. And then that sort of cast a bit of a net, and people who I didn't. So it was kind of a mixture of people who I knew on social media, but maybe barely had never met face to face, or people maybe like Chris Blarski, who you knew, or and some others who I didn't know at all, who happened to see the announcement on Twitter. So then it started, building out from there. And I like Victoria is a great example. I had known her on Facebook for a few months and never met her, and then we did a theremin themed October event for Halloween, and she came out and I met her, and then they've been to every meetup since.
Right.
She and her husband Tom.
Well, they've become a real staples of the whole electronic and experimental scene in the Denver area.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that's one of the huge benefits of the meetup is even early on, people started meeting. They said, hey, maybe we should join forces and try to pull a show together. Did you know about this show next week in Denver? So this sort of networking started happening. And for example, with Victoria, I think I met her in October, and we started collaborating on things within a month or two. And so it's sort of a combination of all these events. Without the internet and social media, we wouldn't have been able to sort of cast that wider net.
Right. Now, one of the things that happened is after a little while, the old Louisville Inn actually closed down in order to be remodeled, or it was bought by somebody, and you end up having to change venues. And this is kind of important because one thing I've noticed is, in general, meetups don't actually survive a change in venue, right?
Yeah, I've seen that as well. If the venue changes, then the meetup's gone.
Yeah, the meetup falls apart, right?
Yeah. So I think that what happened for us is that was a bit devastating because we really liked it. That back room was sort of like being in some 1950s basement or something, right?
Right.
So there was, except it had the old tin tile ceilings from the 1800s because it's a coal mining town. And when they remodeled, they shut down very quickly, like the day before our meetup, and people still showed up and stood outside the doors and met. They were so into the meetup. They're like, we're going to do something, right? And I just sort of showed up at the door, assuming somebody didn't get the email that we canceled, but a whole bunch of people came. So we said, well, let's all go out to dinner. So we had this sort of meetup anyway, where we all just popped to a local restaurant and had dinner. So I kind of knew at that point, I better keep going with this. People are anticipating it. They're looking forward to it. It's becoming part. Yeah. They're into it. It's becoming part of their social lives, and as well as also maybe an inspiration for and also a way to connect and to talk about work. So I thought, well, I better get in another venue. So there was another member, Greg Kennedy, who is a teacher. Speaking of like a wide variety of people, we can maybe get into that in a minute, but he was a teacher who was using Ableton in STEM schools, and he knew of a venue in the next little town over. So for those who aren't familiar with this area, you have Boulder and then little towns that were coal mine towns surrounded by open space. So we have Boulder, Louisville, Lafayette is the next town over. We found another venue, and they were kind of in the same boat. They had 3 meeting rooms, and they said, hey, bring people thirsty and hungry, and we'll let you use the room for free. So we moved to this place called 95A Bistro, and we were there for almost a year. And the meetup continued to grow, having that. Again, the formula was isolated space, consistent second Tuesday, same time, and using social media, and then having people network and word of mouth. So, it just continued to grow month after month after month. And so, yeah, we survived the venue change. We've survived the venue change, I think, 4 times now.
Right. Well, but each time it's kind of come at almost an opportune time, because the move to 95A was at a point in time when you had pretty much outgrown that basement room at the old Lafayette Inn. I mean, it was fun to be there, but it was also starting to get a little like sweaty smelling.
It was a little gamey down there.
Yeah, a little gamey, right. And so this place was bigger. It had a place where you could sort of do a projection system, and it allowed for maybe a little bit bigger format of a discussion or of a demonstration. I mean, in a way, it was almost like moved from being a discussion group to being like a demonstration thing, right?
Right. So, we did have demos in the first one, but it was pretty tight and cramped.
Right.
But when we went to 95A Bistro, we could actually set it up. They actually had a screen we could use. We started doing, I think, emphasizing a little bit more the presentation side of it in that room, and people could all hear and be very comfortable sitting around these tables and be in this space. And I should mention that one of the other reasons, if you're going to do a synth meetup, you have to be self-contained because you can't count on the venue. Like the 95 Bistro had a screen, and we showed up once and the screen was broken. So because I do interactive visuals in my show, I have a projector, I have a screen, I have a little Bose L1 compact in case of emergencies. I have a little mixer, a little Mackie. I have cables I bring. So when I load in, it's like the Sherpa load in. I bring a bunch of stuff. I end up using 3/4 of it. If the venue's system fails, I end up using all of it. Right. So we're completely self-contained. It's like pop-up meetup at this point, and it was very early on. I can actually kind of remember I tried to make a series of screens to work in the old Louisville Inn. I was hanging sheets and trying to do all this stuff. About cut my finger off trying to make a frame for that. So I switched to this screen. The venue was kind of organic, right? It all sort of was working together. We outgrew the room. We lost the room. We went to the bigger room, had the bigger screen.
Right. And then from there, the next step was to move to the Walnut Room, which is kind of a historically important venue in the Denver area for performance. They've been around for a long time hosting performances for a lot of people. But what was unique about that was it actually had a performing stage, it had a sound man and all that kind of stuff. And again, it seemed like, well, first of all, why did you get booted from the 95A?
Yeah, in that particular case, and this is my advice to other people doing meetups, I think they had renovated that restaurant and they were trying to grow the business. And I don't begrudge people for what I'm about to tell you. I'm just telling you this is the reality. So when you have a venue that's kind of friendly and they say to you something like, if you come down, you can use the room for free in exchange for bringing people thirsty and hungry. In other words, for exposure. I'm bringing people into their restaurant. And then people come back and buy meals later. And by the way, we would always say that, if you were in the meetup, we thank the sponsor of the room and say, make sure you come back and support these folks because they're giving this room for free. But in this particular case, they had gotten busier and there was more competition for the rooms. The Optimist Society, for example, was opposite us many nights. Right. And then they started getting near the holidays. So the room is a revenue generator at some point. And when the room becomes a revenue generator for a venue, you're probably not going to last long unless you're going to pay. Right. So we got into that position where it was getting a little awkward, and I don't begrudge them for it. It's just a fact they could generate revenue from the room, and they couldn't continue to have us use the room. So we moved on and survived that one as well. But as you said, it was an opportune move because we ended up moving to a bigger venue yet. By then, now the meetup had grown to maybe 110, 120 people in the meetup, with meetup sizes ranging from 15 people in the summer when it's kind of hot up to 30, 35 people jamming into this room. And so the move to the Walnut Room was significant because it can hold 120 people.
Right. And one of the things I remember about relatively soon after the move to Walnut Room is when you really had a big event, which was the Ableton Live launch for, I think it was the Push 2 launch, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a stunning number of people.
Yeah, so let me just back up a little bit on the Walnut Room. So I have to mention somebody along the way as you're building a meetup and the meetup's growing, you're building connections with people who then become supporters of the group. They actually want you to succeed. So I have to give a shout out to Randall Frazier, who was booking the Walnut Room. Mm-hmm. And he also was the one who got the original Ableton user group into that room way back in 2010. I can't say enough about Randall. He firm believer in the notion of a community like this. If you can imagine, they traded that room for us bringing people thirsty and hungry and gave us a sound man every night. And the guys got into it and super professional. Nobody was phoning it in. They're up there. Where do you want the mic? What's going to happen? Do you want to use the projector? I mean, it was unbelievable. And
it was as pro of a performance environment as I'd ever worked, and they were just handing it over. It was amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, that I have to give a shout out to Randall Frazier for that, for sure. And he's been a friend of the meetup, and as was the Walnut Room. I just want to, maybe we should talk a bit about I think one of the things that made the meetup grow, that changed a little when we went into the Walnut Room, was the format of the meetup. Before we went to the Walnut Room, and originally, the format was, I had a schedule, so everybody knew it was going to happen. I'd put it up on meetup.com. And in the beginning, it was 30 minutes, show up, get some food and drink, sit down. Everybody has name tags. And I thought, is this going to work? It might seem dorky, right, to have name tags at a musician's meetup. But remember, the goal and the objective, rather, with the meetup was for people to connect. So we had name tags. One of the ways I kind of promoted the use of the name tags, initially I was doing giveaways. So I would number all the name tags. And that would, and if you wanted to be in a chance for the running for the giveaway, you had to have a number, which meant you had to have a name tag. So early on, that was sort of the motivated people to put the name tag on, and then after a while, it just became how we do it. Right. So we have name tags. So that's the first 30 minutes. You sort of get in, orient yourself. Next, we have a lightweight presentation with a rotating theme every month, and that would go for 45 minutes to an hour. So I think you once told me this, that, people, we were doing these things 7:00 at night on a Tuesday. When we were in Boulder, people were driving from as far away as Colorado Springs, Fort Collins. Some people were coming in from Canyon City, driving 2 hours to come up to the meetup. And so you're kind of toasted after that, or even if you commuted across Denver before they finished the US 36 expansion. So it was really great to come in, kind of get a glass of beer or a drink, and then have this presentation and with a rotating theme. And another commonality of this format was these presentations were from within. As the group grew, we had this amazing demographic of software engineers, professional musicians, hobbyists, teachers, writers, amazing mixture of people. And we would come up and rotate these presentations so that, part 2 would be the presentation. And then after that, everybody introduced themselves, every single one of them, if you could imagine. So we go through this, get your beer, sit down, have a light presentation that's hopefully somewhat inspiring, not necessarily completely educational, but maybe it's somebody's work. And then we go around the room and you say, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your rig? What do you want to learn? Or what's your next project? Something that simple. And you go for maybe 1 minute. So we go around the room and everybody introduces themselves and you can see their name tags, right? And we get to the end of that. And then we kind of do this 1, 2, 3 break, and then everybody mingles and the whole room lights up. In the original format, you'd close out the night with everybody just talking and mingling, and the din went way up and people were connecting, and it was incredible, right? So that was the original format that we used for almost 2 years. When we went to the Walnut Room, as you mentioned, that had an amazing stage. So I thought, man, we'd really be foolish not to add performance to this. Right. So we had a meetup that went from 7 to 9, and then we started doing what we call the after meetup, and that was from 9 to 10:30. And we had a performer on the big stage with the full PA going from 9:30 to 10. Just one of those 30 minutes that leave people wanting more. Again, we were able to bring people in from within the meetup and let them perform. Some people had never been on stage. Some people were seasoned and were just trying out a new way to do something. Some people started in the meetup 2 years before, had never performed live, had gone from knowing nothing about synthesizers to buying interesting rigs to perform live in front of their friends. So it was an amazing way to close the circle, right?
Right. One of the things that I was always curious about is if you ever felt like having that performance time actually hamstrung people making the connections, if sort of like the bustle to get a performer up got in the way of people interacting.
I don't think so. I think that if we run the clock on this second format, you show up at 7, you get something to eat, something to drink. Now it's 7:30. We do a little bit of an intro. We do our light presentation. Then we do our group intros. And then I don't think the performance was ever a barrier. And if anything, it was more of a conversation starter or an inspiration. Some people would say, oh, wow, I didn't know you could use this that way. And then it would start a whole nother conversation. What was the barrier, though, to the social networking aspect was just simply growth.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say, because at some point I think you stopped being able to do the everyone talks thing because there were just simply too many people.
We're at the Walnut Room, and we have capacity for 120 people, uncomfortably, but you could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the meetup starts to really grow. Right, we break 200 people, 220. We're just adding people all the time, and the meetup size was going from averaging 15 to 30, like 35, like we were doing at the 95A, to 15 to 55. Right. So the events were getting bigger and bigger. So what we started doing is, for those events, we would have the new people introduce themselves and have people stand up and do announcements who had gigs coming up. Or if you heard a new person introduce themselves and you thought you had something you could help them with, you might stand up and introduce yourself. So we kind of did an abbreviated introduction. I think the maximum you can really do this, everybody introduces everybody else in this format, is about 35 people.
Mm-hmm. Then it starts falling apart, huh?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that on the nights when that happened, and it wasn't every single meetup, we would do an abbreviated introduction. Okay. It didn't really change, though, what happened after the introduction. People would, because at that point, now we're 2 years in, right? People, it's on their calendar. They're looking forward to it. They're coming down to talk to people. It's such a, again, the goal was no competition, but to sort of it's not a zero-sum game. We wanted to have a way for people to connect. So people who were seasoned would go out, and if they saw somebody new, they would go talk to them. It's incredibly friendly and powerful, right, to have a base of 120 people with maybe there's a core of 30 people or 10, 20 people that come every time. And when they see a new person, they go talk to them and bring them in and introduce them to somebody of a similar interest. So I still felt like after the abbreviated introductions, boom, the whole room would light up and the din would go up. And that never changed, even though we had abbreviated introductions.
Right. So in your experience, what were the things that got the most activity at the meetup? I mean, certainly something like this Push 2 release, which was sort of an organized event, brought in a lot of people. But in general, what were the things that drew people in?
Yeah, so how this planning goes is that we rotate a new theme every month, and I would sort of read what happened over time and historically, and try to also correlate that with time of year, like was it hot out, that sort of thing. Was it nice and sunny in Colorado and people were out biking, right? So the meetups that were bigger, tended to be bigger, were more general, less educational, less prescriptive, less esoteric. That would be one type, and the other was anything related to Ableton or anything related to modular. So if I had a few, slow months, and by the way, I don't mind having a slow month. As I say, even at this point, if one or two people show up and want to sit down and have a beer with me and talk about the synthesizer, I'll still go down, right? So I will take risks and put in something I think might be interesting, people have never heard of, and I'll sandwich it between something that is going to be maybe more general or more popular. Because part of this is to be exposed to new ideas. So, for example, Tim Thompson, who invented the Space Palette and who's worked with, Roger Lynn on coding some things, flew all the way out here to show us the Space Palette. Nobody knew what that was and never heard of it. And he flew all the way out just to come to our meetup, and I was able to host him. And for those meetups, you may not think you might want to come to that, but people come and they see it. I had Langdon Crawford, who teaches at NYU and lives half-time in Colorado, do a talk on his work on gestural hand controllers, which he'd been working on for quite some time. I actually first met Langdon at the Margaret Guthman instrument competition at Georgia Tech, and I saw like his first controllers were wood blocks with like rubber bands. I don't know what controller was in it, but I thought, okay, this is a little esoteric. I know it's not going to be as big as maybe a modular meetup, but people came and they really enjoyed it. So I'll take some risks to promote people within the community who have very, very respected work and interesting ideas, right?
Right.
So on the more of the vendor side of things, you mentioned Ableton. So in last November, I guess it was, Ableton was about to launch Live 9.5 and Push 2, and I had gotten to know them through just my work on my blog and through the meetups Some of the members, had been in contact with them. And so I had also done some of the university tours for Ableton. So I had a relationship with them. And they reached out to me and said, by then we had, I think, 320 members last fall. And they were like, hey, we'd love to host your meetup. We're going to buy everybody pizza, and we're going to come out and we're going to launch Push 2 in Colorado at your meetup. Would that be okay with you? And I'm like, that's fantastic. Why not? So we blew the room out, though. Everybody was so excited about Push 2, and Ableton themselves promoted it, and we had our largest meetup ever. I think we were at 110, 115, 120 people.
Yeah, that was pretty much capacity for that room, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
So yeah, I mean, quite a journey, right? To go from the old Louisville Inn, where you have 10 of us, 12 of us sitting around drinking a beer in the sweaty basement, to the Walnut Room with the full PA with 120 people in it who want to see Ableton's latest release.
Right.
So I was I joke that it's like the little meetup that could. We started getting a reputation. Right. People would, like Arturia came in. They happened to be in town at Guitar Center doing some training, and they had the prototype for their first mini brute, which hadn't been released yet, and they heard we had a beer and a meetup, so they came out and brought the prototype over.
I'm trying to think. You had Bert from Audio Cubes out once, right?
Correct. So Bert from Percussa, who makes the Percussa Audio Cube, came out to recently. He was in doing a little tour of the prototype for his next modular synth, which is based on the Audio Cubes, and he flew in and part of that tour and picked our meetup as one of the stops where we got to see it. So, so we've had guests like that. We've had Tim Thompson, we had Bert, we had Steve Turnage from Seattle, who wrote the book Desktop Mastering. Skyped into the group, and I was that was actually at the old Louisville Inn, and they had a great internet connection, and I set up a high def camera and a mic, and Steve walked us through mastering a track, and people got to walk up to the mic and he could see them. It was like he was right there, and ask him questions about mastering. So we've sometimes had special guests like that.
Uh-huh. Did you ever worry about looking like you were too closely tied to any one company or any one technology?
Not really, because we would rotate. Like, we'd have a big Ableton meetup, and then the next meetup would be like a drum machine shootout, right? So we didn't really. It wasn't a focus. We're always clear about that. Ableton's going to be in the house. They're sponsoring this meetup. Isn't that awesome, right? So, and then most meetups are just not like that. So I think it's a matter of not doing it too much.
Sure. Now, of the things, I mean, we've talked a lot about the things that were successful. I'm curious about what were things that were not successful. What are sort of like anti-patterns that you'd want to pass along to anyone else trying to do a meetup?
One would be, as you say, would be to maybe get too close to a particular vendor or sponsor. I think one of the reasons our meetup is successful is that it's community funded. It's free. It's always been free. I pay the meetup fees. I ask for $1 donation, and it's optional. So if you don't have $1, that's fine. Come to the meetup anyway. And so because it's community sponsored, and I don't take money from general, other than maybe giveaways or something, we're not beholden to anybody for picking topics. So I don't feel like I have to pick a particular topic because of a connection from a donation or from a vendor. And I'm very clear about that with vendors if they want to come to the meetup, that just doesn't work that way. The other thing is, I'll just mention Ableton is favored in some ways is just because of the I started running demographics. I can export where, basically your zip code and what your interests are. You can sign up and say what your interests are. And probably 60% of the meetup is, maybe a little more, does Ableton. So if we do an Ableton or does modular. What else doesn't work? I would say trying to demo hardware with live cameras is difficult. You have to really practice. You have to practice it a lot. So if somebody comes in and they haven't practiced with a live camera, how they're going to do their presentation, that might not go down so well.
Have you ever done like recordings of the meetups for sharing, or is that something, or are you trying to force people to show up at the venue?
Yeah, I discourage recording or any sort of live broadcast of it, other than if someone's performing and it's their discretion for the after meetup. Sometimes people love people to shoot videos so they can have a copy for their archives and help them with social media. But recording the meetup would sort of like going to a party at somebody's house and then using Periscope, right? It would just be rude. So, what's great about the meetup is you can have really direct conversations. It's a social hangout. And so there's nothing really to broadcast. Even if somebody does a presentation, it's a little loose and they feel comfortable. So even when people have visited, it's just not like you're an academic setting where it's really dry or they're presenting it in such a way that it would be compelling after the fact. So one of the other reasons I started the meetup is we are all connected, most of us on Facebook and Twitter, but there's just not as much bandwidth to that, right? So I want to make it worth your while to come down. I want the venue to be nice. I want there to be other people there. So if you don't come down and you miss it, you miss it.
Are you still doing them at the Walnut Room, or has it moved again since then?
Yes, we've moved again, and that was Randall Frazier, who had been fantastic with the meetup, was kind of building a new scene in Denver at a place called the Globe Hall, and it's on the outside of town. So again, this is how it goes, right? These venues Denver's being gentrified a little bit, and the dynamics are changing. Walnut Room's still great, still has a great PA, but one of the things we started realizing is that now we're up to 480 plus people, right? The meetup's big. So we can maybe help build scenes and help build awareness around scenes that would help people have places to perform, right? So it's kind of getting to the point now where Randall was like, hey, I've got this new venue. It's a little bigger. It has a great PA. It's got a separate room. You can have it, for free as long as you bring people hungry and thirsty. And would you like to give it a shot, right? So now he's asking us, would we take a risk on him? He took a risk on us. Right. So I said, yes, let's move it. So we moved it. And now we're at this new venue. We're meeting coming up in August. We're going to do an Ableton link jam there. And, I'm going for the record. I don't know what the record is, but we're going to try and get
the record for people on a link session, you mean?
Yes, yeah, that's what we're gonna go for. So anyway, yeah, we moved again, but the formula is the same, right? Nice room. They have food and drink. They have an isolated room. They have a PA. They have in this case they have a sound guy again. So we're sticking. We've been there 3 months now. It's the same format, meetup and after meetup.
Mm-hmm. Well, our time is out. We're burning through the time quickly here, but there's one thing that I think anybody who's considering doing a meetup has got to wonder, which is that you've been doing it for a while now. How do you prevent from getting burned out? How do you make it so that you don't get sick of it?
Yeah, well, I would say there's a couple things about it. One is it does become difficult at some point to come up with the new themes all the time and to keep the group going, and especially now that we're 4 years old. So one of the things I'm doing now is skipping some months so that people still anticipate it. And also it helps me concentrate the group a little more. By the way, we changed the name when we moved to Denver to the Rocky. It used to be the Boulder Synthesizer Meetup, and now it's the Rocky Mountain Synthesizer Meetup. And by changing the name, we're up and down the Front Range. If you look at our demographics, we have people, again, up in Fort Collins, Boulder, Denver, Colorado Springs. So I think that I would say leaning even more towards keeping the presentations general. We did a really great, I called it sort of a lightning round modular shootout. So we're kind of experimenting with the format. So it's a little less lecture and a little more people participating. So in that particular scenario, people would come up, they would take a picture of their modular, project it on the screen, go through their patch, and I had a clock running. They got 5 minutes, I think it was, to get through the patch.
I was a participant in that. It was unnerving a little bit, but it was cool.
Yeah. So then it becomes a little more like a game show. It's a little more snappy.
Right.
It's the other part of it is now it's not all me, right? It's not me deciding. All I have to do is kind of come up with the idea and engage the community. And for me, how I'm keeping it fresher is I'm doing more events where I'm counting more on the people in the meetup to be a part of it. For example, this link jam. We're going to do a little bit of an intro on what Ableton Link is all about, and then it's going to be as many people as possible in that room participating. So I guess one way to prevent from burning out is to mix it up with events where somebody isn't even presenting, but it's a full-on community event, right?
Right.
I know we're kind of been going a while here, but I do want to give a shout out to Victoria and Tom Lundy, who've helped a lot with the meetup. They're with Cuttlefish Arts. When we were growing to a certain point, we decided to make a logo, so they've made logos for the meetup and that have been fantastic. People like Mike Metley and yourself have helped me come up with themes. Mike actually hosted a meetup because I couldn't last year. So the community, my biggest thanks is to the community, because it's just an amazing community. And anytime I think about maybe we should, we've been doing this a while, what's the value? We'll be at a meetup and someone new will introduce themselves, and they'll sit through the introductions. They've never been there before, and they'll stand up and say, I've been looking for a group like this my entire life. Like, no kidding, right? I've been in my basement with a synthesizer, and I'm home, right? That's an amazing thing.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, one of the things that, I actually hold really dear is someone like Chris Sessions. So Chris Sessions I met in some of the earliest meetups. He had bought an Access virus. He was learning how to use it. He was doing some basic stuff. I hung out with him a little bit, showed him a couple of things, but he just came and absorbed things constantly, right? And you could see him sort of growing over time, to the point where just before I left Denver, he actually did the thing where he performed at one of the meetups, and it was an amazing thing, because you saw the growth that he went through. Obviously, with a lot of his own effort, but also with sort of like the interaction with the whole community. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that myself, I think it's more the norm now that people end up, as a result of the meetup, performing more or collaborating more or getting involved with collaborations. And Chris is just a great example of someone who started out and he was already an artist in his own right with photography, and
amazing photographer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he sort of came into his own through the connections in the meetup and his own work, and got to perform. So he's an example of someone who came full circle, and that's a pretty amazing thing to be able to provide, right? To have a meetup, to have a place where you can do it.
To sort of bring things around to our own full circle, if you were going to, let's say you're like me and you moved, or something happened and you found yourself in a different situation, and you were either going to start a new meetup or you were going to help someone else start one. Mm-hmm. What sort of represents the starter's kit of stuff to do, stuff to read, people to follow? How would you do it? Well, you mentioned this book by Hotchkiss, that the Freedom Manifesto, which was kind of influential. Is there other things that people can read for inspiration? Is there other hints about, have these bits of gear before you even get started to really help people have a chance to succeed?
Yeah. So if I were just to summarize it, it would be general. Have a name that's general. The names are really important. Use meetup.com, because meetup.com will allow people to find you. Facebook is you just need to have a sort of a presence on Facebook that matches the name for some people that use Facebook. But I can't tell you how, when people RSVP on meetup.com and managing those meetups and managing name tags and RSVPs, it's just made to do that. And when you use meetup.com, the number of people that actually show who RSVP, that the ratio is very high. If you only lose maybe 10-15%, whereas on a Facebook invite you're lucky to get 10 or 15% depending on the event, right? So meetup's crucial, and it helps people find you in the area. And then I would say for a synth meetup, because you don't know what's going to happen with the room, you have to have some kind of a way to amplify sound. I use the Bose Compact L1 Compact. You could use just some monitors, something, so if the room is dead, you can do your thing. Right. You need to have a projector and a screen and a webcam that could be used for presentations, like a Logitech C920. And I can give you show notes on this stuff too as well, but you need a webcam. You need maybe a couple of extra cables in case someone forgot one. And those are like the basics. And you need to, I think, start with a format maybe that's similar to ours and then work it depending on the vibe of your group. And I'll give you an example. I've shared this information with some others, like Jeremy DePrisco, who's out in Pennsylvania, and he has the Susquehanna Experimental Music and Sound Meetup. So they're going. I shared this last year with Jacob Waters, who now works for Roland, and he started the Toronto Synth Meetup, and sort of taking our format as a template. Right. And they started their meetup in May 2015, and they have 231 members.
Wow. So
what I would say is start the meetup. There's a paradox of what should I do? And the answer is start it, name it, get your land grab on meetup.com and maybe a Facebook page, right, and start having events in rooms that will work for free, and make it a free event, and don't try to mingle in paying for a fee-based event with a free event. Just keep it free, because it'll just confuse people.
Right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and talking about this. I hope it inspires people, because I just know that the Boulder and then Rocky Mountain Synth Meetup was super influential to me. It was I met so many amazing people there. And I'm hoping that people use this as maybe a stimulant or an opportunity to think about doing meetups in their own community, because if nothing else, the opportunity to meet new people, to perform with new people, is amazing, and it's something that's not to be missed, right?
Yeah, and I guess I would close with thinking about this. This is not a zero-sum game, and even if there are other meetups in your area, and you think you can create a community that might get a few people to come out, do so. But cooperate with the other communities, as you know, or people may not know, but in Boulder's very vibrant as far as meetups and such, and there are similar meetups that might be specific, like an Ableton user group in Boulder. We're extremely friendly amongst each other. We invite each other to our groups. We'll let people stand up and announce their meetup within our meetup, and vice versa. So I think that it's about sort of raising the water level in your community so all the boats rise higher, and you don't get competitive about it, and you cooperate and don't think of it as a zero-sum game. Then the whole community wins, and it becomes more vibrant.
Indeed. All right. Well, thanks a lot, man, and we will talk again soon.
Okay, thanks, Darwin.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Many thanks to Mark for getting together and talking about the meetup. My experience with the Rocky Mountain Synth Meetup is that it was one of the strongest and most interesting meetups I'd ever been around. So I want to thank him for that, and I want to thank you for listening and for hanging out with me another week. I'll see you next week. Bye.